Good evening. This is the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the nerve center of American capitalism.
The 1980s may be considered a time of unrestricted capitalism, allowing everyday men and women to achieve the true form of the American dream. Or, contrastingly, a time riddled by corruption, scandal, and moral decline that exposed the deep-seated faults within a freelance capitalistic economy. Jordan Belfort, a Jewish man who hailed from New York City, rose to become the poster boy of the 80s bull market because of his rapid ascension from the lower class to owning one of the nation's most lucrative trading securities company, Stratton Oakmont, that earned him above $50 million a year. Belfort became infamous for a lifestyle defined by excess. He was known to host lavish parties, own exotic cars and luxury homes, and enjoy a who's who of drugs, including most famously Quaaludes. Yet, Belfort's collapse would soon send his company and life into turmoil. Stratton Oakmont became bogged down in federal legal proceedings. Nadine Caridi, Belfort's wife, filed for divorce, and all that Belfort had worked so hard to create, despite the unscrupulous manner he participated in, vanished before his very eyes. Jordan Belfort ultimately epitomizes the way in which corporate greed throughout the 1980s in the U.S. created a business culture plagued by scandal, corruption, excess, and fraud that would culminate in drastic enforcement measurements undertaken by the U.S. government. Belfort's tumultuous life began in 1962 in the Bronx, New York City. He grew up in a Jewish household and was raised by two accountants, Lee and Max, in Bayside, Queens, where he developed a keen sense for the value of the dollar. After high school, he graduated from American University with a degree in biology. Belfort became motivated by the improving stock market in the 1980s and the potential money that could be made on Wall Street. In his pursuit of wealth and class mobility, Belfort began trading safe securities in 1987 that were handled on the National Exchange, which included stocks from blue-chip companies like Coke and Disney. He was hired as a trainee stockbroker at L.F. Rothschild, a prestigious securities firm that maintained a respectable reputation throughout Wall Street circles during this era. Shortly after his hiring, Belfort was fired after the business lost millions of dollars due to Black Monday in 1987, an event that triggered a worldwide economic panic. Black Monday was a detrimental stock market crash on October 19, 1987, that began in Hong Kong and quickly spread like wildfire to Western markets, eventually hitting the U.S. and crippling the U.S. economy for a short period of time. This global stock market crash was a product of systemic program trading, overvaluation, illiquidity, and unethical market psychology. Belfort's departure from L.F. Rothschild would precipitate his rapid ascension to one of Wall Street's wealthiest and most envied stockbrokers. Shortly after, Belfort was introduced to penny stocks from the company Stratton Securities, which he then took over, establishing Stratton Oakmont in the late 1980s in Long Island, New York, with business partner Danny Porish. Penny stocks are cheap securities that trade under $5 and are not listed on the National Exchange. They are usually shares in very small, unstable, and somewhat unreliable companies that are highly risky yet can potentially result in high profits because of the large amount of shares one can buy for a small amount of money. Many stocks are subject to scams and illegal activity due to the fact that they are not subject to the same regulations and standards as stocks traded on the National Exchange. Stratton Oakmont was an over-the-counter brokerage house that frequently used a pump-and-dump scheme to trick investors and make millions in doing so. This scheme involves traders increasing the value of a stock they own with falsely positive rhetoric and fake reportings to sell for a high price. This results in investors and buyers losing significant amounts of money in the shares of the unreliable companies, as the brokerage firm reaps the benefits. At its peak, Stratton Oakmont employed about 1,300 brokers, and Belfort himself earned over $50 million a year, which accumulated to a net worth of over $1.5 billion. He also brought multiple companies public and grossed more than $30 million from IPOs or initial public offerings. Stratton was responsible for the initial public offering of over 35 companies, with the most notable name being Steve Madden Ltd., a brand known worldwide for its high-end shoes. However, Stratton failed to maintain product control within their firm to monitor and check different securities for reliability, safety, proper pricing, dependability, and security and quality, which eventually drew unwanted attention from the SEC and FBI. and catalyzed a long and draining downward spiral for the company. The firm soon had to be disciplined by the National Association of Securities Dealers, starting in 1989. As multiple investigations were being brought forth against Belfort's troubled company, Stroud and Oakmont sued Prodigy Services Co. for libel in a New York court and claimed they were reporting false and slanderous information about their company. After the FBI concluding the investigation, Belfort and Porsche, along with a host of other Stratton employees, were charged with securities fraud, money laundering, and many other crimes before the firm was eventually shut down in December of 1996. Danny Porsche and Jordan Belfort were federally indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud and money laundering as a result of their illegal activities throughout the 80s and 90s. Securities fraud involves investors buying or selling stocks based on fake information and results in large losses. Money laundering is turning illegal profits into legitimate assets. Belfort and Porsche later pleaded guilty to 10 counts of securities fraud and money laundering in 1999, admitting that for several years they operated a scheme in which they manipulated the stock of at least 34 companies. As part of their plea deal, they received less prison time and cooperated with prosecutors in their investigation of other unscrupulous brokerage firms. The final deal that Belfort made with the government was to pay a minimum of $10,000 per month for life towards the restitution, yet later on a judge ruled that Belfort was not required to pay 50% of his income past the end of his parole. He has since claimed that he is additionally putting the profits from his U.S. public speaking engagements and media royalties toward the restitution, in addition to the $10,000 per month.
Prior to his arrest and the ultimate demise of Stratton Oakmont, his brainchild, Belfort gained high commission through pump-and-dump schemes with penny stocks. He and his other corporate executives at the company acquired tens of millions of dollars in personal profit, which by result allowed them to live a very lavish lifestyle defined by partying, alcohol, drugs, and prostitution. Belfort and friends became hooked to several drugs that fueled their trading in the fast-paced environment as well as their excessive lifestyle. Some drugs included cocaine, morphine, Xanax, Valium, marijuana, Adderall, and Ritalin. Belfort and his colleagues became frequent users of methaqualone, also known by their street name of Quaaludes. At the height of Belfort's addiction, he personally attested to taking about 22 different drugs a day. Employees were encouraged to use cocaine on the job to enhance performance and productivity, and prostitutes could frequently be seen among the cubicles of Stratton Oakmont during the office hours. Strippers were also rented to perform in Stratton Oakmont to celebrate big sales or record-breaking profits. Belfort's company, with its particular flair for extreme, embodied the fast-paced, high-stakes, and lavish lifestyle of Wall Street companies and their executives during the 1980s. Since the possibility of wealth was so high due to a lack of regulation and flourishing bull market, brokers became consumed by greed, competition, and immorality. Many traders began to use illegal means to get rich quick as they got caught up with the cutthroat environment that characterized Wall Street during this time period, even if it meant that it resulted in federal indictment. These schemes included the Ponzi scheme, the pyramid scheme, and the short and distort scheme. Illegal market practices like money laundering, pump and dump, short and distort, and security fraud were prevalent in big firms during the era, and all contributed to a larger culture of corruption that had become the status quo on Wall Street. Yuppies, young wealthy traders with fashionable lifestyle, ruled the stock market for companies like J.P. Morgan Chase, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, and came to embody and lavish and privileged lifestyles led by Wall Street brokers. As the computer became popularized in the workplace, stock trading became even faster and more efficient. Due to high-pressure environments, drugs like cocaine, Adderall, and Ritalin were commonly used as trading floors developed into chaos with screaming, cursing, and sometimes even full-out fights. Although extreme, Belfort and his Stratton Oakmont company came to symbolize a period in American business where greed became socially acceptable if it meant acquiring wealth and success. From the 1980s into the 2000s, other people have engaged in similar pump-and-dump schemes where they manipulated the value of stocks and bonds in order to make money. One example of this is Jonathan Lebed, a 15-year-old who used a pump-and-dump scheme during the dot-com era. Lebed bought several shares of penny stocks and then promoted them on message boards with multiple accounts by exaggerating their quality and potential price increase. When other investors bought the stock because of his positive statements, which was the pump he dumped, or sold his stock and made thousands of dollars. Eventually, the SEC filed a civil lawsuit against Lebed due to stock manipulation. However, he only paid a part of the money he made through the scheme, yet vowed to never engage in those practices again. Another example is Enron, which was an energy, commodities, and services business out of Texas. The owners of Enron participated in the pump and dump scheme, as well as other security scams that went over the heads of many Wall Street workers. Enron reported huge false profits and gains to drive up the stock price, and even hid this with more suspect accounting practices as well. When all was said and done, it was reported that 29 workers at Enron sold their high-priced stocks for billions of dollars. However, soon after, Enron lost millions of dollars and suffered legal issues which eventually led to their bankruptcy. The actions of Stratton Oakmont and Enron both contributed to the creation and passage of Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. Langbar International was also another company that engaged in the pump and dump scheme. Pump and dump scam is consistently used through spam emails that are sent to millions of users as well. These emails account for about 15% of all spam sent, and scammers using this process are able to make about 4.29% on returns from investments, while investors lose about 5% of their investment in the span of only 2 days. The stocks that are promoted in these emails are almost always penny stocks that are under $5. The scammers promote the stocks through emails, yet sell them the minute that the email is delivered. The opposite of the pump and dump scheme is the short and distort scheme. This is when traders short a stock and lower its price with negative statements. When the investors cover the short by buying it back at a lower price and yield profit. When JP Morgan bought Bear Stearns in 2008, it was believed that investors who shorted multiple stocks were using negative rhetoric to drive down the price of Bear Stearns so they could buy back the stock at a lower price. However, this was never proved to be true. And finally, Dana Giaquinto, who was another disgraced stockbroker who was indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud in 1999. Some of his clients at his Cassandra Group company included A-list movie stars from Hollywood's younger generation, including Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Edward Burns, Cameron Diaz, Tobey Maguire, and Heather Graham. Giaquinto and his scheme all came crashing down in 2000, when he was arrested for securities fraud for stealing over $10 million from a number of those clients.
Since penny stocks are targeted in the pump and dump scheme, they've been subject to many regulations, restrictions, and standards after Belford's scandal. Some criteria that these securities are now required to meet include price, market capitalization, and minimum shareholder equity. These are put in place to prevent fraud and scams that could result in investors losing millions of dollars. Stocks traded on the New York Stock Exchange are not allowed to be categorized as penny stocks anymore because they are vulnerable to manipulation and schemes. As a result of the Stratton Oakmont and Enron scandal, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was implemented in 2002. This is also called the Public Company Accounting Reform and the Investor Protection Act. This is a U.S. law that established new requirements and expanded regulations for trading firms and companies. This law also forbids the destruction or deletion of financial evidence. This evidence includes documents, data, papers, or records that can be used by authorities to verify the legitimacy of companies or trades. This bill creates specific responsibilities for directors of the public companies, as well as adding stricter penalties for those who violate these regulations and laws. Additionally, it requires the SEC to implement stricter rules about firms, companies, and directors cooperating with the law. Penny stock standards and penalties are controlled and implemented by the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. The SEC is an independent agency that enforces security laws and regulations, while the FINRA is involved in regulation and enforcement of security laws for the New York Stock Exchange. The Truth in Lending Act was implemented in 1968 by the United States government and was a law created to keep investors informed about their transactions by making traders disclose the terms and costs of the trading securities, especially in penny stocks. However, due to a lack of enforcement and supervision, companies, Stratton Oakmont in particular, maneuvered around this law to engage in pump and dump schemes and make millions of dollars. In 1934, The Securities Exchange Act was put in place that required brokers to approve the buyer of penny stocks and provide the customer with a detailed account of the trade procedure and how it was conducted. It also made traders draft a document outlining the risks of buying in penny stocks and investing in the small companies, as well as informing the customer of the current market quotation. Lastly, the traders were required by law to disclose to the customer the amount of money the firm and the investor in particular would receive in the transaction. Stratton Oakmont and Jordan Belfort constantly ignored all four requirements, which resulted in the U.S. government delegating more power to the SEC and the establishment of harsher penalties and increased regulations and requirements in the penny stocking industry. Belfort, Porsche, and the rest of Stratton Oakmont were able to find loopholes because the SEC had lacked manpower to investigate traders who violated these rules and requirements. In regard to the aftermath of the Belfort scandal, he began to write about his experiences and stories of being a stockbroker when he was in jail. After he was released, he eventually finished his first book called The Wolf of Wall Street, which was published by Bantam Books on September 25, 2007. This book is about the process of establishing Stratton Oakmont and the pump and dump scheme that he and his company engaged in. It also mentions Belfort's fallout and arrest, as well as his experiences in jail. His second book is called Catching the Wolf of Wall Street, More Incredible True Stories of Fortunes, Schemes, Parties, and Prison, which was published by Bantam Books on February 24, 2009. This book touches more on the wild experiences and adventures as a stockbroker in New York, as well as his life in jail and after. Belfort's first book was then adapted into a film called The Wolf of Wall Street, which was directed and produced by Martin Scorsese and starred Leonardo DiCaprio, and was released on December 25, 2013. Belfort is currently a motivational speaker who teaches clients his straight-line sales psychology, and he currently charges between $25,000 and $70,000 for speaking engagements that include corporate training, private counseling, and keynote speaking. His speaking engagements are organized and booked through his business, Global Motivation. The central messages of these speeches are the importance of business ethics and learning from the mistakes that he made with Stratton Oakmont in the late 80s and early 90s. Ultimately, Jordan Belfort's lavish lifestyle, sickening greed, and unscrupulous ethics embody the larger Wall Street business culture of the 1980s, which came to be defined by corruption and excess. The premier stockbrokers of this era came to recognize the government's lackadaisical economic regulations, and eyeing an opportunity to achieve vast wealth, took advantage of numerous corporate loopholes to cheat investors, game the system, and make their millions. Belfort's moral deterioration is reflective of a decline in ethics on Wall Street during the 80s, as stockbrokers were willing to resort to great measures to achieve what they believed to be the American dream, a shallow and idealistic image rooted in wealth and material extravagance. Their insatiable thirst for riches, coupled with a deregulated economic environment, would result in systematic fraud, earning the late 80s the title of the era of misplaced values.